just a little bit about my recent trip to Turkey and Greece. Um, I know some of you are reading the blog I was writing for my school. I'm not gonna, as I was getting this ready, I found that I was saying a lot of the same things that were on there. So I tried to shift a little bit to focus on a few things I just learned or takeaways from my trip. This will make more sense in a little bit. I don't usually put myself in sermons or prezzies. As a heads up, this is a selfie of me laying down on the road in Ephesus. I got a lot of weird looks when I did this, but there is a reason for this. I'll get to that soon, for that symbol and everything. So, a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, I went with my school on a biblical learning trip to Western Turkey and Greece. We visited cities and ruins of ancient cities that some of the apostles went to, the Apostle John, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Philip. We didn't go to all the churches of Revelation, but we did go to a good number of them. At the end of this whole thing, I have a QR code for the blog I wrote. I'm not a blogger, so I was asked to do that. It was part of me being a chaperone. But there are more pictures and more things we did every day. My head of school, Jake Mulvihill, he led the trip. He's led dozens of these things to Israel and Egypt and Turkey and Greece. He's a history guy. He was a history and Bible teacher. Now he's the head of our school. But he's very knowledgeable. He did a lot of awesome lessons. It was great to not be the teacher all the time. I was sort of just a listener every now and again. So I wanted to share some pictures, but a lot of these you can find on the blog, a lot more and more content. But I want to share some takeaways that I learned, or just things that I learned. I don't know a better word there. So the first one is just how ancient the world is. America, when the Native Americans were coming over, and the Aztecs and the Mayans and all that, that's old, but it's nowhere near as old as this. The cities that we visited, the ruins we visited, were older than the New Testament. Some were, hundreds of years older than when Jesus walked the earth. Some of them were sort of rebuilt. They took the ruins and kind of cleaned them up a little bit. Some were found intact. This is the city of Hierapolis. So, Colossae, which in the blog I do reference, we visited the city of Colossae, or the location of Colossae. It's a giant dirt mound right now because Harvard and Cornell and a few other schools are gaining grant money to go and unearth all the ancient city of Colossae. So we went to this trailer park across the street from there and just sort of looked at the dirt for half an hour. Said, that's Colossae. All right, Paul went there. It's a dirt mound now. There are a lot of cities like this that were nearby. So Colossae and Hierapolis were neighboring cities of Laodicea. And this, you can see in this picture here, all of that was ancient city. It was a massive city. Almost every city that we went to had a theater. The Greeks and Romans liked theaters for entertainment, for public gatherings. But what was wild with all of these, the Romans especially figured out acoustics very early on. You could stand on that stage and talk in a normal voice, and people at the top where I am in that picture can hear like I'm being heard right now. With no bullhorns, no special things, just the acoustics. It was wild. This theater was more cleaned up than some others, but just the idea that the ancient world is ancient. This again is Hierapolis. This is the Domitian Gate. Domitian was the Caesar that sent the Apostle John to Patmos in exile when he got the revelation. This was the gate that began the road to neighboring cities. And it was a big road, and you could still walk on that road. Cars and buses could still drive on that road 2,000 years later. It's all marble. It was pretty darn impressive. Some places like in Ephesus, this is the Library of Celsus. Celsus was a leader of the area. He was very big in education and built this learning center. Ephesus is another enormous archaeological site. It's huge. You could spend days in just the city of Ephesus. The roads are intact. Cars are still using a lot of them. We went inside this. It's a big structure, and it was 3 stories, and then it was much wider, but this is all they can rebuild, all the ruins after thousands of years. this is the theater in Ephesus, so we're on the road. You can see the theater here. It's really hard to overstate how big this is. This is the biggest theater outside of the Colosseum of Rome ever found. And again, you could stand at ground level and talk. With this one, a little bit you'd have to raise your voice, but people at the top could hear you. In the book of Acts, when Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus, there's a story in Acts where some Christians are like arrested and dragged in front of the theater, and the people of Ephesus gather in the theater and shout at them for 2 hours. But we were there. Like, we were at a place where Paul walked around. He walked on that road. The Apostle John was in Ephesus. That was his home base after he left Israel. He walked on that road. They'd been to that theater, and to like be at a place where the apostles were was pretty intense. And that it's in such good shape. Now, they have a giant crane there. They're adding more of the ruined blocks in the top levels that they're going to finish it eventually. They're using cranes and giant motor machines to do this. The Romans used like pulleys and slaves and cows and stuff to move all the marble blocks around. It was just insane. They had it fenced off. I couldn't get back in there, so I put my hand through the fence with my phone. This is the shorter side of the theater. On this side over here is what I could see. But again, you stand there and you could just talk and people would hear you. This would seat thousands upon thousands of people. And again, this is over 2,000 years old. This theater was finished. Like, Paul was here when the city was in its full scope. Ephesus, I think, was the 4th largest city in the Roman Empire. What's cool is, so we were here. There were these other guys like near us, and they were speaking language I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was German, but I used to know German about a long time ago. It wasn't German, so I figured they couldn't understand me and the guys I was with. So we began to talk about, well, imagine you're a brand new Christian. You've been a Christian for maybe a year, and the city arrests you and has everybody yelling at you that their gods are so big and powerful, screaming at you, a deafening noise for 2 hours. How hard would it be to be a Christian at this? Like, how hard it would be. So these guys start saying in broken English, yeah, it's really hard to be a Christian in the world. And we start having this thing. I'm like, oh, they're Christians? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, great. We had this big moment. They were from the Netherlands. We saw them a few more times around the area, but they were 3 friends doing a pilgrimage around the missionary journeys of Paul. I'm emailing with one of them a little bit now, but just this was where the Apostle Paul worked for 3 years. This is where the church was growing. Ephesus was a pretty big church. It had Paul, Apollos, Aquila and Priscilla, Timothy, John, a lot of big deal leaders in the church ministered at this city. It was pretty wild. In Ephesus, as the city was so well done, they actually had like restored ancient public bathrooms. You go in there and you were like pretty much knee to knee with the next person. They were not very far apart. I imagine there are these like slots here. There were probably some sort of curtains or something, but you were right there. There wasn't a lot to it. But even like when the Romans built something, they built it to last. They had a very far view of history and future. They built their bathrooms out of marble. They said, we're going to build this and it's going to last forever. And every civilization will be less than ours. So even the public bathroom is intact. It wasn't like a porta-john or like a hole in the ground. It was all marble. What's funny is archaeologists will go in the like latrine sewers underneath and they'll find like coins. They'll find like old versions of what we call like keys. Like people would have like dropped their stuff in the toilet and been like, oh man, it's gone. So they'll actually go into the toilets and all their systems down there and find like books, like all kind of stuff. So some of these structures, again, are enormous. It's hard to fathom how big they are. This is the temple to Apollo. This was just massive. That's one pillar. And I'm a pretty big guy, but even that picture, it took 5 of us doing this to get around the pillar. And that was just one of them. And this thing had hundreds of pillars, all that size. They were enormous. This is the agora, or like market area of Smyrna. It's one of the churches of Revelation. You can see in the background a parking structure. Like this is in downtown. The modern day name of the city is Izmir. It's one of the bigger cities in Turkey. This was a 3-story marketplace. So all the arches there were supporting the next levels up. And this was like underground. They had to dig all this out, all the dirt they had to clear away, and this was intact. It just was a huge structure. We were able to go down, so there's this fountain that goes all throughout the city here, or like the Agora, and they don't know where it starts from. You could come and get water for free, clean water from this fountain in the marketplace, and even now archaeologists don't know where this thing starts. They've sent like drones back in the pipes and they can't find the start of it, but it's still flowing. It was flowing even while the structure was like buried under other things. It was still flowing. I thought that was pretty wild. The Parthenon of Athens, this is a really big structure. You can see a little person right here. We weren't allowed in there because they were moving blocks of stone to keep on rebuilding this. It was built and intact, and then it was, who was it? I don't remember. There was an army that was attacking Greece like in the late 1800s, and they blew it up, or like they set off a bomb in it, and it blew a side of it off, but the rest of it was intact. So you imagine this thing is giant marble and took a semi-modern bomb and took it like a champ. And the things were just moved around. They weren't broken up. It was pretty wild. This is me on a piece of the road. So in Athens, they had bits of ancient road exposed. In Turkey, you could like touch things and climb on things. In Greece, they were not okay with that. I got yelled at for touching a pillar. I just was like, oh, cool. And they're like, do not touch things. And I got yelled at. But they had bits of the road exposed so you could see and touch the old road. I did wear my Vibrams as much as I could, except on the day it rained. Everywhere I hiked and everything, it was a lot of fun. But even that, like this is a road Paul walked on. This is a road that Timothy walked on. The Parthenon was already like 500 years old when Paul showed up to preach the gospel in Athens. From our hotel, that's the balcony of the restaurant level, or like the food level of the hotel, and that's the Parthenon in the background. It's right in the middle of the city of Athens, the major city, and there's this ancient structure there. Athens, Turkey, it's just the heart of so many ancient civilizations. You would just have pillars, like ancient things in the middle of downtown, just in a little walkway. There's nothing really like that in this country. In most countries, there's nothing like this. That this was old when it was old. That makes sense. Like when Paul and Timothy were doing stuff and the Apostle John were doing things, it was already an old city. It was already older than America when Paul was there. In Corinth, this is the Acropolis, like where they would have their fortress and government center. We hiked up this and went all up in there. But again, it was old. Paul was here, Apollos was here. The gospel was preached here at its beginning. Like Scripture tells us in the book of Acts that the apostles were here, and it was already an established major city. It already had hundreds of years of history when the gospel hit this place. And thankfully, a lot of things are intact. Aphrodisias, this is a stadium where they would do races like horse races and chariot races and athletic competitions and gladiatorial matches. And this is pretty much intact. They just sort of like cleared the brush away from the seats. It's still there. It's a huge structure, but again, it's this ancientness. I just kept having to tell myself this is ridiculously old, and yet it was still old when the apostles were here. When the church was just getting started, a few decades after the resurrection, this world was very old, and it's a testament, one, to Roman engineering that it lasted this long, but it's also a testament to the truthfulness of Scripture, that these events happened. It's not just myths or stories or fun things that we tell ourselves to have a moral code. These events happened. These places are real, and you can go there. It was just unreal. If I don't know if you ever want to look at the blog thing, there's a lot more pictures of what we did every day. and just the oldness of the world every day was hitting you. Like, people figured out how to build these things so long ago, when white Europeans were still painting ourselves blue naked in the woods like the Romans were building these things. When the Celts and the Woads and the Picts were, dancing with fairies in the jungles of Ireland, they were building this stuff. So that was the first thing that I was hit with almost every day, was just how old the world really is and how old civilization is. So the next thing we got into is everywhere we went, we were learning about the early church. In all these major cities, the gospel went there. Paul went to cities, the Apostle John went to cities, Timothy, the church was on the move almost immediately. At some cities, they had unearthed remnants of actual Christian activity in those places. Other times it'd be like secret symbols. Sometimes it was wide open. So this was the agora, the marketplace. It'd be a main street with shops. So they've unearthed all these shops. And they found one shop that was a dyeing shop. You'd bring your fabric and they would dye it, right? They'd color it. And they found that, you'll see here, on his dyeing vat, where he would put the water with the dye, the coloring, and dip your fabric in, the owner of the shop put crosses all over this. His shop would be covered in Christian symbols. Now, this is impressive because, one, the church is still pretty young. Two, when this was built, or when this guy was doing his business, the Christian religion was somewhat outlawed. It was something that brought up a lot of persecution because the church refused to also worship the gods of Rome or also worship Caesar. They refused to give their allegiance to the world. So when this guy, every customer he had, they knew, they would say, what's this symbol about? Or they would know, that's a Christian symbol. You're that new group. He would either lose business, get reported, or they'd be like, oh, interesting, tell me about it. Every day he went to work, it cost him something. He could have had more business if he was quiet about it, if he was kind of a secret, Christian, because it's all very scary and dangerous. But he openly testified he was a Christian every day he opened up his own business. And it's just impressive. One, that he did it, that it happened at all. Two, that he carved it into, again, marble, so it was going to last forever, and that archaeologists found it. And it's just one more testimony of the church being the church at any time and place. This guy was willing to bear the cost of losing a business or getting in trouble with the government because he very flagrantly was like, I'm a Christian out here doing business. And it's just really neat that out of all the things in this city, this was still found. That's our guide, Gokhan. He was really cool. I really enjoyed him. We got along real well. We just clicked immediately. We had a good time. He liked this, so he's a Muslim man. One of the things we found really odd in Turkey is Turks, they've been a Muslim nation for a long time, but they're very Western. When the Ottoman Empire was defeated in World War I, a man whose nickname is Ataturk, the father of the Turks, reformed the nation into modern-day Turkey. And he's on every money they have. He is the best guy. But it's more of a Western democracy. They are not super theocratic. It's not like Saudi Arabia. So there'd be the call to prayer. Every mosque would send out the call to prayer, and almost nobody would go pray. It was very moderate. He is a moderate Muslim. He actually is really a fan of Christians and Christianity. He would say things like, I'm not a Christian, but I love Jesus. Like Jesus that you worship. He would specify not just the prophet Jesus of Islam, the Jesus who is God that Christians worship. I think he's great. I live my life by the Christian ethic. He loves Christianity. And we were all wondering, what's that next step that's keeping you from it? So we were in Laodicea, and he calls this his pillar, because he is one of the only tour guides who will bring a group to this. So it's a pillar in the main center of the ancient city that had a Christian symbol and a Jewish symbol. It's a menorah right here and shofar horns on either side. That this was a location a church would meet, and that the church had Jews in it. And they would, again, they carve their symbols into this pillar as a, here's where we're gonna meet. And again, it remains because it's carved in something that is so durable like marble. But he really liked to point out like the Christian locations in all these cities. But he said this is the one thing that's unique. No other tour guide will mention this, but Christians met here, and they had Jews in their church, and they were publicizing it. And they said, if you want to find us, here's where you can find us. And he goes, yeah, in the Book of Revelation, the church in this city had a bad rap. They had become lukewarm, but there was a time when they were not, and they were letting everybody know, here's who we are, and here's where we meet if you need to find us for some reason, good or bad. And again, that you're letting the world know you're a Christian, and it's going to cost you, because most of the time, up until about 300 or so AD, being a Christian was not a benefit, it was a disadvantage. So, this is the tomb of the Apostle Philip. What's interesting is, so you see this hill, until about 10 years ago, it was just a hill. It was all covered up. And archaeologists would find money, like Christianized coins. It wasn't money, but it'd be like coins used to help the church. So you would have a coin, but anyway, they'd have a picture of Philip, the apostle, and then a church, and then a tomb. And the archaeologists thought, why would they be having him and a tomb in this place? So they began to do ultrasounds in the ground and found that there was a church here. And they had found another church up the hill. It was sort of a memorial of the martyrdom of Philip. They knew he was martyred here. They didn't know where he was buried. And so they had this excavated church, this right here actually, where it's called a martyrium. It was a church that celebrated the martyrdom of somebody. And it had these areas where you kind of walk in a loop to pray and kind of have a prayer time in motion. But they began to do ultrasounds and found that further down the hill was an older church, like a 1st century church. And so they also found that in the middle of this church, like in the center of the building, was this older building that was probably around 65 AD, 70 AD, that was older than the church up the hill. So they began to excavate, and they found remains, and they found all these things, like it was dust, it wasn't like bones. But they found, through the seals and the language, that this was the tomb of the Apostle Philip. This is where an apostle rests. And then we talked about how it's the Gospel of John that talks about Philip the most, by name. Because the Apostle John ministered after this guy died in this area. This church was started, a lot of the churches in the area were started by Philip. John came later and ministered. So in his gospel, he's like, remember that guy who y'all knew? I knew him too. He's one of the apostles like me, and I'm going to fill in some of the gaps of the other gospels that focus on Philip. But this is me and our head of school. We're at the tomb of Philip. What was wild is there was like a barred gate, but you could, it was like pretty big. So I was putting my hand and I was feeling stuff in there. You know, this is where an apostle's body lay for a long time and turned to dust. But it was just a really interesting thing that the church spent resources to build a tomb for the apostle up really high up a hill that was hard to get to. Because it was hard to get to, the government wouldn't bother to come tear it down. So after a while, it became kind of a pilgrimage where Christians would kind of walk up here and pay homage or something to Philip and thank him for his ministry and go worship in his church up the road. But I don't know, I've never been to a tomb of an apostle before. So this was, is there a question, Pastor Chris?
Just wondering what city this is in.
Where was this? I'm blanking. I don't remember off the top of my head. I have to look. It all, in my mind, it all kind of blurs. That's why I have it written down in the blog. But I want to say Aphrodisias? I'm not sure. If you look, it'll be there, or I can tell you. But it is, yeah, one of those places. Sorry. But here's the martyrium. It's further up the hill. It was built in like the 300-400s, so it was more modern-ish in comparison, and it was a bigger structure because the government allowed bigger church structures by that point. But again, this was mostly intact. It would have been a covered structure. There would have been like a roof and all that was being more like wood and timber, which was dust by then. So this church in Laodicea, it was a pretty big church. Now that covering there is very recently built to protect it from rain and whatnot. By this point, this city had a church that was thriving, and it's where they would have church councils. I mean, it was really intact. It had like mosaic floors. But even this church that was, from where the Apostle John was in this city to this church was still longer than America has been a country. You see what I'm saying? Like, Americans don't have that kind of history. And we have to go to Europe and other places to have our history. This is old. And again, they just sort of cleared ground out of the way. They moved dirt and found more and more things. And those coverings allow work to keep going. So, moving into the modern era, we visited a church in Izmir, modern-day Smyrna. It's one of a handful of Protestant churches in the whole country. It's kind of a long story, but outside of Turkey, it's called the Armenian Genocide, but it's illegal to call it a genocide in Turkey. So, there was, in the mid-1900s, like a war, Greek, Armenian, and Turkey, and one of the ways they settled it was, Greece said, we have Muslims in our country, you have Christians, give us all your Christians, we'll give you all our Muslims. And there was a forced population exchange. Like in a weekend or something, like people were kicked out of their homes and sent over to a country they had not lived for in generations, or lived in. When that happened, there were 0 Christians in Turkey. In Turkey, when you're born, if you're not a Muslim, you have to specify that on your IDs and stuff. That's become less and less of a thing recently, but for a long time it was, if you're a Christian, you have to say so. On your birth certificate, on your driver's license, all those things. In 1981, there was 1 Christian in Turkey. 1 person who said, yes, I am a Christian, out loud. Today, there's a little over 7,000 total of people who will openly say, I'm a Christian. We were into this church, the Izmir Protestant Church. Their website, I think it's just in Turkish. I went on there and I couldn't find a translate button, so if you want to go check them out, you can, but I don't read Turkish, so. You'll see that symbol. That's what I was laying on a minute ago. We'll look at that in a minute. But this is their church. They were about the size of our church, the people-wise. It was at the very top, the 7th floor of a business building, and the owner of the building did not like the fact that Christians were there, but because they paid their rent on time, he couldn't kick them out. So on Sundays, he turns off the elevator so that they have to walk up the stairs. And it was on a Sunday when we went, so we had to walk up 7 flights of stairs, and it was brutal. 7, yeah. But they have some elderly in their church, so people will like carry these grandmas up the stairs. But I mean, we don't have any stairs from here in the parking lot. It's nice, but sometimes in the winter, the owner of the building will turn off the heat, or in the summer, he'll turn off the AC. So they have to sometimes like beg and plead and all that kind of stuff. But this is their church. It was very like good. They built it up real nice. It was very pretty. They had like a breakfast area. They also had a balcony on the side, which was really nice. But this is their church, Chadash. I'm sorry, their associate pastor in their church. The head guy was out of town. So he met with us and would tell us some stories. He said, he's one of only 2 pastors in the whole country of Turkey who are seminary trained. His head pastor is the other one. He went to seminary in Michigan. And he said what's kind of sad is a Turkish Protestant church will send one of their pastors or whatever to seminary in America. These guys are like, man, it's nice here. I'm not going to come back home. I'm going to stay here and work at a nice, safe, high-paying American church. And they keep losing people. So he actually came back, and they're trying to find ways to have seminary courses at their church so they don't have to send everybody away to be tempted by America. He just had some crazy stories. I mean, he said, okay, so 7,000 roughly Christians in the country, and he said, our church last year led 13 people to Christ. Like, think of the numbers on that. Out of 7,000 total Christians in 1 year, his one church accounts for 13 of them. Like per capita, those are big numbers. In a major city that's got a ton of Islamic influence and government, whatever there, they were still able to preach the gospel. His daughters, he had 2 young daughters, and they only have 2 Christian friends because their church is spread out over the city. What's that like, right? But they're like, we don't have a lot of our friends. My kids, they go to a public school because there are no like Christian private schools, nothing like homeschool. But they're known as Christians, so they deal with that at their schools with teachers and whatnot. So one of the things he told me, and I think I mentioned it in the blog, is he was saying, oh yeah, in 2022, the local cops, they came to our head pastor and said, hey, listen, we just got a credible threat from ISIS. They're coming to your church. ISIS is coming to this place, and they're going to come get you. And the police chief, who had a decent relationship with the head pastor, said, we'll send 2 of our deputies, our guys, to your church, and we'll protect you. I said, that's great. And the 2 guys, they show up and go all the way up in the sanctuary and just sit down. And the pastor, the head pastor goes, well, you know if they get up to us, you can't stop them. They'll explode or whatever, and you'll die with us. And they're like, no, it's fine. And these 2 guys would not go out front. They would not go to the bottom of the building and out in the sidewalk. They just didn't want to move. Now, on the one hand, they got to hear the gospel, and they got to hear the teachings of Jesus, these 2 cops, which might be the reason that they wouldn't leave. But then the head guy looks at Chadash and says, okay, here's what you're going to do. And as an associate pastor, this spoke to me. The head pastor says, okay, I want you to go out front. And if you see somebody with a gun or a puffy jacket that looks like it's too big for them, run up and hug them. So you die with them out there, and we can still have church. Now he's telling us this, and he's kind of laughing, and so some of our group is laughing, and I'm just like, I can't believe I'm hearing that. And he goes, so I hugged my wife and my daughters, and I said, I hope I'll see you after church. Now, he's still here, so nothing happened, thank God. But he walked outside, assuming that was the end. Now, as an associate pastor, I thought of my head pastor thing. Ben, I want you to walk outside and hug a suicide bomber. And in that moment, I might have said, well, you're the head pastor. But he seemed really like this. He was really glad it didn't go down poorly. He's like, well, we needed to keep having church. He said it kind of matter-of-factly. And then, so last week when we canceled church, I was like, it's too cold outside. We canceled church. Hey, there's ISIS suicide bombers on the way. We're having church. Like, it convicted me a little, although it was really cold. So, I don't know. But that was wild to me. Like, his stories, they were saving people. They had his plans. I mean, he told us their plans for the next 10 years is they're going to open up a seminary in Izmir out of their church. They're trying to bring some people over from America and other places so they could be teachers. They're getting resources. Their own church is publishing Christian books in Turkish at their own expense, Bibles, apologetic books, missionary books, devotionals. They're just themselves pooling their resources and making this happen. They have zero government funding. He's a part of the Dutch Reformed group, so that's kind of cool. But the Dutch Reformed in America don't give them a lot of money. He says, we don't really need their money because the government will track that more. They track foreign money given to us, over the internet or something. The government will track that more and puts us up under the microscope, so we don't need their money, we just need help. And so anyway, that was really wild. So this was the image of their church, right? And it's also an image we saw on just about every ancient ruin, temple, road. These things were chiseled into ancient roads, ancient temples, ancient walls. They were everywhere. Sometimes there'd be 10 of them on one block of different sizes. What this is a very, very ancient, very secret Christian symbol. So what you would do, because if you just had a cross that said, hey, I'm a Christian, you were identified by the cops, let's say. So what you would do is have this symbol. It didn't look like much of anything. So what you would do is you would have it, and if you were walking with somebody else and you didn't know who or what they were about, you would just start tracing this on the ground. That. Now some of you have seen this before on like the fish symbol. That word in Greek is ichthus, which means fish. The one story that's in all 4 Gospels, other than the crucifixion, is Jesus handing out fish and bread. It's also an acronym. Every Greek letter is also the beginning of a word. So the iota, the chi, the theta, the epsilon, and the sigma. Jesus Christ, God, Son, Savior. And they could do this somewhat secretly. But you have to understand, I mean, I took so many pictures, and we saw these things everywhere. And because the cross is so recognized as a Christian symbol, and because the Christian church and Islam has not always got along well, the symbol of this circle with lines in it, the 8-segmented circle, it's also called the rota, but this church uses that as its symbol because it's not so, I guess, inflammatory as a cross is in the Muslim world. Isn't that wild? So, that's just sort of like from the apostles up to now, the region of what we now know as Turkey and Greece and that whole region used to be extremely Christianized, and the gospel was very active there. With the rise of Islam, it's not so much. But you got to think, like, you know how like vandals and vandalism and all that stuff, this is vandalism. Like, this is ancient vandalism, where somebody took the time to carve into marble. That's not with a stick, that's like with an iron thing and doing this symbol. And there was maybe 36 of these things just on the road where I was. I tried to find a bigger one. But yeah, I laid down and took a picture, and these people were looking at me like, what are you doing? But they were everywhere. On temples, on roads, on agora, on government places, as if the church was like, this is ours now. Or we can meet here. Or, okay, if anything goes down, meet here. Meet at this one, right? Some would have crosses in them, but some were really basic like that one. It was just really interesting to find all that out. So, one of the passages that Mr. Mulvihill, Jake, our head of school, kept bringing up in his lessons was this, 1 John 2, 5-6. By this we may know that we are in him being Jesus. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. One of the interesting things I found is, so the group we were with, middle, upper class, white, suburban people. About half of our group were adults with businesses, and they were well off in all this. When Jake would talk about the difference that Christians were in the Roman Empire, it seems so foreign. They're like, well, of course, back then Christians were so different, but now in America it's all very fine and we're all very safe here. I kept thinking about the history of Hmong folks with Christianity and how the gospel is still so new. I mean, it's only a handful of decades where the Hmong people have been exposed to the gospel at all. You think, I mean, the 1950s was the earliest, and that's 75 years. It's hard. It's hard to see the costs the early church paid if a group is so far removed from those costs. So, all the religious worldview of the Greeks and Romans, it was about the gods and goddesses and about self and about the glory of us, and we want to have power. We want to build a civilization that'll last forever out of marble and stone, and it's going to be huge and magnificent. And every time a visitor comes here, they'll be dwarfed, blown away by how powerful we are. And then you have this growing group of people calling themselves Christians who are doing something different. They're not gathering in temples and theaters and giant marble places. They're gathering in people's homes or in the woods. They go where they can. They're not worried about social status or wealth or power or this Look at how grand we are. They're saying, come and join us, whether you're rich or poor, slave or free, male or woman. You can join us. And that we're a community. We talk about things like truth and eternal life, and our sole characteristic that we want to live out is loving each other. Not how can I benefit from you, but I want to show you concern and compassion and care, no matter where you are in the social hierarchy, whether you're a senator or a slave. The Christian message was weird. It didn't make sense. It didn't say the same things the world that they were in was saying. Look at how powerful we are. Look at how much we love each other. Look at how strong our civilization is. We serve an eternal kingdom that is not always visible. Rise as fast and as far as you can. Build wealth, build power, build status, build virtue, build a Christ-likeness. Some of the worship that the Romans would do was very sexual, very gluttonous, celebration of extreme pleasure. Almost every Caesar, and as each new Caesar came, they wanted more of this, where the Caesar said, I'm a god, worship me. You can worship whatever you want, as long as you also worship the Caesar. And Christians would say, this is not one among many gods, we worship the God. Romans would, at least every year, but sometimes even more often, have to look at or come and pay homage to either the bust, the head of the Caesar, or a whole statue. They would have to bow down to him and say, Kaiser Kyrios, Caesar is Lord. Christians would either just not go, or they'd get there and say, I can't say this, or they would turn their back on Caesar, bow away and say, Jesus is Lord. Christos Kyrios, Christ is Lord. Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is Lord. And then they were arrested for things like treason, breaking the law. You didn't worship our leader, you didn't worship the state, you're a bad person. It wasn't you can't worship Jesus, it was you can't only worship Jesus. You have to still participate in all the things we're doing. Yes, go worship your Jesus, but when we have a wedding, a funeral, a party, a city celebration, you have to be there, and you have to be present, and you have to be active. If we're worshiping by eating, you eat. If we're all doing this with worship of a God, you worship that God too. If we're eating, if we're drinking, if it's sex, it's food, you do whatever. Go worship your Jesus too. You have to also do this. And they said no. The lifestyle was contrary. It was a no to every Roman yes. Yeah, they had to shop. Yes, they had to have a business. Yes, they built houses. Yes, those things. But it was, we have to be different. We're in this world, but we have to be not of the world. They have to be different. And it cost them. It wasn't simply, I might look embarrassing. It's not simply like family might be mad at me. It's I cannot participate. I cannot be in my church and living for Christ and doing these other things. I have to break away. I have to say no, even if that means I'm losing my family, even if that means I'm no longer considered a true Roman, even if that means I'm going to lose my job or my business or my income, or I'll lose my house and property and I have to move away. It's not simply I'll do the Christian thing here and the Roman thing here. It was, I can't be both. I have to either walk away from Christ and live in this world and do what the world wants here and now, or I have to do what Christ wants here and now. That willingness to be different, that saying, is participation here, or going along with this, or showing up for this? Yes, that's what's expected. Yes, it's what I'm supposed to do as a family member or a society member or whatever. But I'm going to say no. And I'm going to do other things. And in those moments, it cost them a lot. There were deaths, and some of the Christians were just executed. Some were made to fight in gladiatorial arenas with just wooden weapons or no weapons. Some were made to fight wild animals. Some were crucified. Some were chased away. Some were imprisoned or sent off to other islands. But within 300 or so years, the church becomes influential in the Roman Empire. The church lasts. Then when Rome falls, the church lasts. When the world's empires and states and systems are falling away or changing, the church endures. In the moment, it's going to be the worst because you're going to suffer, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to cost you something when there's always an easier, more convenient path in front of you. But I say, no, I'm gonna do the right thing, even though it's the hard thing, or the difficult thing, or the thing that'll make me look bad. I'm going to do that. There is no more Roman Empire, but there is the church. There are tombs of Caesars, there are tombs of apostles, but the Rome that Caesars led is gone. The church the apostles built is still here. It wouldn't have been if people just said, well, let's just go along and get along. Wherever we went, that was the message. These are amazing ruins. The city was awesome and great and big and powerful. The church was under the gun in most places. And yet here we are as Christians studying about ancient Rome and looking at how the church was there. There are no Romans looking at the ruined church, if that makes sense. Is that making sense? I mean, this whole thing was like, look how the Bible is true and all the archaeology, and that was fine. It was very interesting. But for me, at least, the takeaway was like, there's so much more than simply like showing up at church and those kind of things. We have to live a certain way. Sheng, I know, shared this on the church Facebook page a while back. I don't know if it's there still, but that's it if you want to read the whole thing. I tried to get some pictures in and explain our stuff, so it's like 11 days. It was a lot. Oh, wait, why are you doing that? So, whether you were there or whether you're just reading it in Scripture, these things are real and true and right and good. And it's not simply an interesting book. It's not simply a bunch of morals or fun stories or interesting things. It's a book of truth that tells us how to live and how to live as Christ in the world. So, all right. If there's no thoughts or questions, I guess I'm done. I'm going to pray to wrap up, and then I guess we can be done for the day. All right, well, let's pray. Lord, I am thankful that I had a chance to do this, but I pray, Lord, that the ideas of how old the world is, which is interesting, would not be bigger than the fact that your church is ancient and here. Lord, I'm thankful to be a part of something that's that old and that's that eternal. I pray, Lord, that I and my family and my church would consider our place in this world and how we are to live as salt and light in a place that's pretty dark and evil. I pray, Lord, that we would be willing to pay the cost, that I would be willing to pay the cost of having an alternative message and a contrary lifestyle. That when we are asked to join something or be a part of something, it wouldn't just be a question of I have to, but should I? And that we'd be willing to say yes when yes is appropriate and no when no is appropriate. Lord, I ask for wisdom and the conviction and courage to follow that wisdom, and I pray that in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Have a great week, guys. Stay warm out there.